Hi, my name is Pedro Pereyra, and for almost the past 10 years I have been a wedding and event photographer. If you're just getting started on photography and you want to know a little bit more about your camera, I have here 5 tips in 5 minutes that are gonna help you step up your photography game. So without further ado, shutter speed. This is where I start as a professional photographer. When I look at the back of my camera, how much do you want to freeze in motion in your shot? So for instance, if you are shooting sports photography or a bride coming down the aisle, you want to make sure you have a fast shutter speed. When I'm doing events and I'm waiting down the aisle for the bride and groom to come, I have a shutter speed of at least 1/200th of a second, if not more. The higher the better, but you gotta be careful. The higher you go on the shutter speed, the less light that your camera actually takes in. So for every action, there's gonna be a reaction. So when would have a lower shutter speed? Would be if you are going to take a photo of a waterfall and you want to make sure that that picture has like that motion blur. And night photography, you want to have that shutter speed maybe a second, maybe 2 seconds, maybe 3 seconds to make sure that that shutter is open, gathering all the light. If you're going to use a shutter speed lower than 1/60th of a second, I probably recommend using a tripod, because if you hold your camera, you're probably going to get some motion blur. Portrait photos, and I do family photos, I'm at least at 1/200th of a second, because people are always moving, they're fidgeting, there's kids in the pictures, and you want to make sure that your pictures don't come out blurry. Tip number 2, aperture, or f-stops as they say, is basically how much focus and how much blur do you want before an image and after an image. So for instance, if you're taking a photo and you want to blur out the background, you know that if you shoot at a lower f-stop, let's say you had 2.8 or 1.8, you're gonna be letting in a lot more light into the camera, you're gonna be blurring out the background, and you're gonna have a nice focus on your subject. But you must remember, if you're doing a group shot or something, 1.2 aperture won't work for a group, as it would only give you a little bit of focus of what you point on. If you're taking a portrait of just one person, you can go as low as 1.2, and your subject will be nicely focused and they will be blurry around behind them. If you're going to be taking a picture of at least 3, 4, or 5 people, as we do a lot in events, I'm at least at a 5.6, a higher aperture, to just make sure that we're going to have everybody nicely in focus. The higher the aperture number is, the less light you're going to be getting into the camera. So you want to make sure that you combat this with your shutter speed. If you go ahead and lower the aperture, which means you make it brighter, now you want to make sure with your shutter speed, you also, the higher you go on the shutter speed, the less light you're letting in, and the slower you go, the more light you let in. The third tip we're going to give out is ISO on your camera, is sensor to light. So remember, for every action there's a reaction. This is the last thing that I said when I'm doing my photo shoots. Why? It's gonna leave you with some digital noise, especially if you're taking your photo at nighttime. So ISO, depending on the camera, this is a 5D Mark III, which is a very good camera. ISO on this camera could be really brought up 7,000, around 7,000, 8,000. You're probably gonna start noticing digital noise with this camera, but anything underneath there is still really nice. But on other cameras that I've owned that are less expensive, you might be able to go to 1,000 ISO or 1,600 ISO. What do? You set up your shutter speed for your shot, you set up now your aperture and how much focus and how much blur you want to create in the background, and now you want to go ahead and adjust your ISO. But I like to play with that shutter speed and that aperture first, leave the ISO for last, and see where I'm gonna fall there. If it gets to a point where my ISO is all the way up at 5,000, 6,000, and my image is still dark, then I'll go ahead and revisit the other settings like the shutter speed and the aperture to see if there's anything that I can do there to let a little bit more light in, so I can reduce the ISO, therefore reducing the noise. Tip number 4, which is setting up your white balance. This will take you all of 1 second and your pictures will go a long way. If you have the wrong white balance on your camera, it can leave your picture looking like you're in Mars. All the things that we've done with the white balance out of whack can definitely throw off your picture and make your picture look very unprofessional. These are all a quick way, one button away from pressing on your camera and actually changing to the correct white balance for your scene. And here is tip number 5, is make sure that you're shooting your pictures raw. You're getting out there and you're starting out doing photo shoots, you're probably going to be a little bit off on your exposure. There's a lot more options in post-production. Start practicing those 5 steps and get them down, and I guarantee you will become a better photographer. And I'm also going to be doing a lot more videos for you guys to learn. So make sure that you hit the like, that you subscribe, and that you follow this channel, turn on your notifications.